Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a time when the world was wide open, untamed, and just waiting to swallow you whole. Picture it: endless forests stretching to the horizon, rivers glinting in the sun, and prairies so vast they make your stomach sink. You step off a creaking wagon into a landscape that feels both full of promise and just a little hungry. And honestly, you probably won't survive this. But don't worry. Tonight, you only have to imagine it from the safety of your bed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city and the time down below, and let's see how wide our little campfire circle really stretches. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wagon groans to a halt, and dust billows around your boots as you step into the raw silence of the frontier. There are no street lamps, no neighbors yelling about property lines, no convenience stores humming with neon. Just you, the wind, and a suspicious rustle in the brush. Welcome to your new home. Your senses feel dialed up. The smell of pine needles and animal musk hangs heavy in the air. Somewhere, water trickles. Somewhere else, something big snaps a branch. You want to call this place promising, but right now it just feels empty. In this emptiness, though, lies both opportunity and danger. That's the paradox settlers lived every day. The first thing you notice is the quiet. Not the comforting silence of a library or a sleeping neighborhood. This is the kind of silence that makes you feel watched. And you probably are being watched, because on the frontier, animals, and sometimes people kept just as sharp an eye on you as you did on them. Historians still argue whether this heightened sense of paranoia was just in the settlers' heads, or if predators really did stalk wagons at the edges of forests. Either way, your nerves don't get much rest. Let's be clear, your supplies are limited. You've got a few sacks of flour, a rusty hatchet, and maybe some nails that cost more than your wagon's wheels. There's no turning back. That road you rattled down? It's not really a road at all. It's a rutted track that'll wash away in the first heavy rain. Behind you lies civilization, sure, but also debts, crowded cities, and the life you gambled everything to escape. The land in front of you doesn't care about your plans. You might dream of a tidy farm with white fences, but for now, you're standing in waist-high grass that hides snakes and ticks. The soil looks dark, rich, and promising, but you have no idea whether it'll flood in spring or harden like cement in summer. Fun surprise waiting for you. The fringe tidbit here: some settlers supposedly carried tiny pouches of soil from their homeland. Superstitious? Maybe. They'd sprinkle it on new ground as if whispering to the earth, "Please, treat us kindly." Whether it worked or not, well, given how many didn't make it through their first year, the soil didn't seem to listen very well. As you stand there, trying to take it all in, your wagon wheels sink an inch into the dirt. The oxen breathe hard, hot steam puffing from their noses, and you realize even your animals are exhausted. They've dragged everything you own across miles of mud, and they're not in the mood for motivational speeches. You're on your own. The sky overhead blazes with late afternoon sun. No clouds, no shade, just relentless heat pressing on your shoulders. If you've ever complained about your air conditioner breaking, congratulations. You'd last about 10 minutes out here before begging for a patch of shade. Settlers often said that the first day in a new place felt like stepping into another planet. And in a way, it was. You weren't just settling land, you were settling into a completely alien life. Here's the kicker: the land may look empty, but it isn't. Indigenous communities had lived here for generations, hunting, farming, and shaping the very forests you're gawking at. To them, you're the intruder. That reality lurks behind every tree line. Will you meet them in friendship, trade, or tension? No way to know tonight, but the thought lingers. Your boots crunch on twigs as you take a few tentative steps forward, scouting for a place to drop anchor. You'll need shelter, water, and firewood before nightfall. But for now, you just pause, letting the sheer vastness swallow you up. The silence shifts, a bird screeches, and deep down you feel it. This is either the beginning of everything you dreamed, or the slow unraveling of your gamble. And speaking of gambles, settlers weren't exactly known for their optimism. Many kept diaries full of complaints: mosquitoes thick as smoke, mud that sucked off boots, or neighbors who borrowed tools and never returned them. It's almost comforting, really. Frontier life wasn't all heroic axes and sunsets. Sometimes it was just you yelling at mud. By now, the sun is inching lower, shadows stretching long across the grass. That creeping chill in the air? Yeah, that's your reminder you need to move. Because out here, darkness doesn't just mean bedtime, it means danger. Wolves, bears, or worse, complete disorientation. No GPS, no flashlight apps. If you lose track of your camp at night, you may as well dig a cozy hole and hope for morning. So here you stand, the brave pioneer, heart racing, hands blistering already from gripping your axe, and one simple truth gnawing at you. Survival isn't guaranteed. It never was. And yet, against all odds, you take another step forward into that yawning wilderness. The shadows stretch longer, and you realize there's no putting it off any longer. If you don't figure out shelter, tonight will be your first and last night on the frontier. Forget the white picket fence dream. You're about to cobble together something that keeps rain off your face and critters out of your boots. That's survival architecture in its purest form. Your options are limited. You don't have a Home Depot or even a nice uncle with a spare tarp. What you do have is an axe, a patch of woods, and maybe a couple of nails if you were lucky enough to afford them. Most newcomers started with what was called a half-faced camp. Sounds inviting, doesn't it? Basically, it's 3 walls of logs with a roof of bark or branches, open on one side toward the fire. Wind and rain? Yeah, those slip right in. But compared to lying under the stars while raccoons rifle through your flour sack, it's a palace. The first swing of your axe bites into a tree, and instantly you get blisters. You thought chopping wood would make you feel powerful, but really, it's just a reminder of how weak your arms are. Frontier diaries are full of complaints about how endless the chopping felt. And historians still argue whether settlers actually cleared forests efficiently, or if they just hacked enough for survival and left ugly scars on the land. Either way, every log you notch is another reminder that muscles aren't optional out here. There's a quirky tidbit worth slipping in here. Some families literally dragged wagon covers off their carts and draped them over sticks to form tents. They'd call it a canvas house, which sounds romantic until you realize a stiff breeze could turn your home into a kite. More than one unlucky settler had to chase his flapping roof across a meadow in the middle of a storm. Try explaining that to your kids while thunder crashes overhead. You stack rough logs, mud smeared between the cracks to keep out the cold. It's messy, uneven, and frankly kind of embarrassing, but it's shelter. The smell of wet clay clings to your hands, and you pretend not to notice the spider that just scuttled past your knuckles. You smear more mud. That'll show him. The roof? Don't even think about shingles. You're layering bark, branches, and maybe some sod if you've got the patience to peel grass and soil up in squares. Imagine tucking yourself under a giant earthy quilt. Sod roofs were actually pretty clever. They insulated well and were surprisingly sturdy. Downside? They also leaked, grew weeds, and sometimes let roots dangle into your living space. Nothing like waking up to a dandelion poking you in the nose. But here's the hard reality. Most shelters built in that first frantic week didn't last. Rain warped them, snow collapsed them, and pests chewed through them. More than one settler spent as much time fixing his cabin as actually living in it. Historians note that by the time many families finished their first log cabin, they were already planning to abandon it for something sturdier the next year. You could say the frontier invented the phrase, "good enough for now." You sit back on your heels, admiring your lopsided walls. They lean at angles that would make any modern contractor cry, but they're yours. The sun is bleeding into the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple, and the scent of fresh sap lingers from the logs. You know wolves don't care if your door is crooked. They care if there isn't one at all. It's worth remembering that cabins weren't just protection from weather. They were also statements. A cabin meant permanence, a declaration that you weren't just passing through. It meant, I'm staking my claim, so don't even think about edging in on my land. Of course, your land might still be up for debate. Maps were shaky, boundaries blurry, and local indigenous tribes had their own ideas about ownership. But for you tonight, this pile of logs is home. And oh, the smoke. You start your first fire, and it pours into your shelter because, oops, you forgot a chimney. Early cabins often reeked of smoke, blackening the walls and choking anyone unlucky enough to sit inside. A cabin without a chimney was basically a hotbox for misery. Families sometimes cooked outside just to breathe clean air. Joke's on you. You'll be coughing your lungs out before that stew even boils. You curl up on a bed of pine needles, listening to the wind whistling through the cracks. Every creak makes you wonder if the walls will topple onto your head. You remind yourself that worse shelters existed. Some settlers literally dug into hillsides and lived in dugouts, underground rooms that were cool in summer and miserable in spring floods. Imagine trying to mop up your living room while it's still raining outside. Yeah, not fun. Still, there's something oddly comforting about four walls, however rickety. You've built a line, however thin, between yourself and the wilderness. Tomorrow, you'll add more logs, maybe even a door. For now, it's just you, your smoke-filled cabin, and the faint hope that this place will hold together until morning. The night hums with unfamiliar sounds, coyotes yipping, owls hooting, the steady crackle of your fire. You roll over, shifting against the uneven floor, and think about how back home you complained when your mattress was lumpy. Out here, you'd sell your soul for a lumpy mattress. So congratulations, you're officially a frontier homeowner. Just don't look too closely at the roof. The first night passes in fits and starts, your ears tuned to every crack and rustle outside. By dawn, you're half convinced that a bear paced circles around your cabin all night. Probably just a squirrel, but in the frontier, even squirrels sound threatening when you're lying awake in the dark. The morning light creeps in through the gaps in your log walls, and the realization hits, you survived the first night. Great. Now comes the next impossible task, finding water that won't kill you. Water is life, sure, but out here, it's also a dice roll. You wander until you hear it, the trickle of a creek, the rush of a stream. The sight of clear water glinting in the sun feels like a gift straight from heaven. But here's the catch. Looks can kill. That sparkling brook might hide parasites that'll leave you doubled over before sundown. Historians still argue whether settlers really understood the dangers of untreated water, or if they just shrugged and hoped for the best. Spoiler, a lot of them got sick. You crouch by the bank, dipping your fingers into the current. It's icy cold, a relief against your skin. The smell of damp earth rises with it, and you almost forget the risk. Almost. In truth, many settlers boiled water when they could, but firewood wasn't infinite, and boiling meant waiting. Some just cupped their hands and drank, whispering a prayer that this wasn't the sip that ended their story. And here's a quirky tidbit. In certain places, settlers believed adding a rusty nail to their water jugs made the water healthier. Iron tonic, frontier style. Did it actually work? Maybe, if you enjoy sipping metal soup. But it shows how superstition filled the gaps where science hadn't yet trickled in. Of course, you can't survive on creek water alone. You'll need a long-term plan. Wells were the ultimate solution, but digging one was brutal work. Imagine hacking into rocky soil for days, hauling out mud with buckets, and praying you didn't hit a dry pocket. Families sometimes dug 20, 30 feet before hitting usable water. And if you dug too close to your outhouse, well, let's just say the flavor profile of your well water would be memorable in the worst way. Your boots sink into mud as you trace the creek, searching for signs of reliability. Is it fed by a spring, or will it dry up by midsummer? You notice animal tracks clustered near the bank. Deer, raccoon, maybe even a wolf. They need the water as much as you do, which means you'll never be alone here. Sharing a watering hole is fine until the neighbor is something with teeth. Settlers sometimes built barrels to catch rainwater from their sod roofs. Smart move, except the water often came down carrying dirt, bird droppings, and the occasional unlucky insect. Still, when the choice was between cloudy rainwater and cholera creek, you took the bug cocktail. And let's be real, you've swallowed worse at summer camp. As you fill a tin cup, the sunlight flickers through the trees, making the water gleam like liquid silver. You bring it to your lips, hesitating. This moment right here, it's the frontier in a nutshell. You're caught between thirst and fear, survival and sickness. And you drink because what else can you do? The cold rush down your throat is both refreshing and terrifying. You wait, half convinced your stomach will start staging a rebellion. And then, because survival always pairs with labor, you haul buckets back to your cabin. The handles bite into your palms, the weight sloshing with every step. Your arms ache, your shoulders burn, and you start wondering how many gallons of water you'll need just to cook, clean, and not die of thirst. Spoiler, more than you feel like carrying. You drop the buckets by your door, and for the first time, you feel a flicker of pride. It's dirty, dangerous, and uncertain, but it's water. And for now, it's enough. You'll boil some, maybe whisper a quick prayer over the rest, and keep trudging forward. Because out here, hesitation is more deadly than any parasite. Later, as the sun sets again, you sit by your smoky fire, tin cup in hand, listening to the night sounds. The water ripples faintly in your cup, reflecting the glow. It's not bottled, filtered, or flavored with lemon, but it's life. And as you sip, you remind yourself, survival isn't about comfort. It's about making do with whatever the land grudgingly offers. So here's your toast, pioneer style, to the stream that might save you or kill you. Cheers. Next morning greets you with stiff joints, a smoky cough, and a stomach that's loudly voting for something more substantial than creek water and wishful thinking. The frontier may have gifted you land and a questionable shelter, but now it demands tribute. You've got to find food. And unless you've been secretly hiding a food truck behind your wagon, that means hunting and trapping. The woods beckon with a promise of abundance, but here's the cruel truth. Animals don't exactly line up politely to be your dinner. Deer bolt at the first snap of a twig, rabbits zigzag like they've got GPS, and turkeys, despite their reputation for being dumb, have a nasty habit of spotting you before you spot them. The phrase easy hunting was probably invented by a settler who wanted to brag because most diaries mention long, hungry days before anything fell into their stew pot. You grip your musket, the barrel longer than your patience, and creep through the brush. The smell of damp leaves mixes with the metallic tang of the weapon, and every sound seems magnified. Your breath, the squeak of leather, the crunch of one ill-timed step. Historians still argue whether most settlers were actually skilled hunters or if they just muddled through and got lucky. Evidence suggests the latter. Otherwise, half those journals wouldn't be filled with complaints about another supper of boiled roots. Here's a quirky tidbit. Frontier kids sometimes hunted grasshoppers and roasted them as snacks. Protein-rich, crunchy, and surprisingly filling. Settlers called them prairie shrimp. So the next time someone turns their nose up at trail mix, just remind them it could be worse. But back to you, crouched in the underbrush, staring at a rabbit that might as well be a mirage. You raise the musket, finger tense on the trigger, and fire. The recoil bruises your shoulder, smoke blinds you, and when it clears, yep, the rabbit is long gone, laughing somewhere in the ferns. Congratulations, you've just wasted precious gunpowder. Powder that, by the way, you probably had to haul across states and protect like gold, which is why many settlers relied on traps. Snares of bent saplings and loops of cord could snag rabbits, squirrels, even the occasional unlucky fox. Deadfalls, logs propped with baited triggers, were another option. They didn't require gunpowder, just patience and a little clever engineering. Of course, sometimes your trap caught things you didn't bargain for. Imagine checking your snare expecting rabbit stew and finding an angry skunk instead. That's one way to clear the neighborhood. You wander deeper, listening for the distant drumming of a grouse or the faint rustle of deer. The sun filters through branches, dappling the forest floor with shifting patterns. Your stomach growls louder than any animal, and suddenly you feel less like a hunter and more like prey. Hunger gnaws at you, whispering that failure isn't an option. Settlers often leaned on fishing too. A bent pin, a line of twine, and patience could snag dinner from a stream. Catfish, trout, perch. If it swam, you were willing to eat it. Diaries mention nights spent crouched by the bank, lantern flickering, waiting for a tug on the line. And sometimes, after hours of waiting, you ended up with nothing but mosquito bites for your trouble. You tell yourself it builds character, but really, it just builds crankiness. Finally, luck shifts. A squirrel, distracted by acorns, ventures close. You line up, fire, and this time, success. Dinner may be small and a little furry, but it's food. You carry it back like a prize, smoke curling from your cabin's fire as if eager for company. The smell of roasting meat soon fills the air, greasy and rich, and you're reminded why survival wasn't always about glamour. Sometimes it was about gnawing squirrel bones and calling it gourmet. Hunting wasn't just survival, though. It was community currency. Extra game could be traded with neighbors for flour, salt, or tools. Indigenous groups sometimes traded dried meat or pemmican, a mix of fat and berries, with settlers who weren't so lucky with their snares. Every kill, every trap, every fish was part of a delicate economy where calories meant power. But tonight, as you sit by the fire with your modest victory, you realize one more thing. Every meal out here is a gamble. Some days you'll feast, others you'll starve, and most days you'll live somewhere between. The wilderness doesn't care how skilled you think you are. It feeds you when it wants, not when you ask. You chew your squirrel, staring into the flames, and let out a half laugh. Back home, you complained when the diner served your fries a little cold. Out here, you'd cry tears of joy over cold fries. Perspective hits hard on the frontier. Your first successful hunt keeps the hunger wolves at bay for a night, but reality soon sets in. You can't rely on squirrels and prairie shrimp forever. The real challenge isn't just finding food, it's figuring out how to cook it without turning dinner into charcoal or ash. Out here, gourmet is whatever doesn't poison you or set your cabin on fire. You hunch over a fire pit, coaxing flames from damp wood. Smoke curls into your eyes, making them water. You cough, wave your hand dramatically, and imagine your descendants someday bragging about their hardy pioneer ancestor. They'll probably forget to mention you spent half your time just trying not to sneeze into the stew. Cooking is primitive at best. Forget ovens with little glass windows. What you've got is a pot dangling from an iron hook, or maybe just meat skewered over open flames. Cast iron cookware is the crown jewel. A skillet or Dutch oven might be the most valuable thing you hauled across the plains. Without it, you're balancing food on rocks, which works until one shifts and dumps your entire dinner into the dirt. And yes, you'll still eat it. 5-second rule? Try 5-minute rule. The diet itself? Repetitive. Cornmeal mush, beans, dried meat, and more cornmeal. Occasionally, wild berries or roots break the monotony, but mostly you're chewing through the same handful of ingredients. Historians still argue whether settlers truly thrived on this simple fare or just endured it, secretly daydreaming about buttered bread and hot coffee. A quirky tidbit. Some families swore by ash cakes, literally dough slapped right into the embers. When done right, the outside was crisp, the inside soft, and the flavor smoky. When done wrong, well, you'd be crunching more ash than cake. Either way, nobody complained too much. Hunger was the best seasoning. And oh, the seasoning, or rather the lack of it. Spices were rare luxuries, salt was precious, and sugar even more so. You learned quickly that everything tasted like smoke. Meat? Smoky. Beans? Smoky. Pancakes? You guessed it, smoky. Joke's on you. If you hated barbecue flavor, the frontier was a culinary nightmare. You ladle a scoop of watery stew into a tin bowl, steam rising into the cool evening air. The smell is rich, savory, and a little muddy, but your stomach doesn't care. Each spoonful fills you with warmth, even as grit from the unwashed beans crunches between your teeth. You think about your old kitchen, about spice racks and store-bought bread, and laugh. Out here, the spice rack is maybe there's wild onion near the creek. But there's a deeper truth. Cooking wasn't just survival, it was ritual. Families gathered around fires, telling stories, singing songs, finding comfort in the simple act of eating together. That charred rabbit leg or pot of beans wasn't much, but it was shared, and that made it feel like a feast. Even now, as you sit with your tin bowl, the flames flickering on your cabin walls, you feel less alone. Food preservation became just as important as cooking. Smoking meat over smoldering fires turned it leathery but long-lasting. Drying apples, pickling cucumbers, salting pork, these were lifelines when winter shut everything down. Imagine opening a jar of pickles in January and practically weeping with joy at the crunch. Modern snack food commercials have nothing on that. Of course, not every meal went smoothly. Fires collapsed, pots cracked, bread burned, and kids accidentally fed the dog half the dinner. Some settlers even resorted to foraging fungi, with mixed results. Eat the wrong mushroom, and congratulations, you've invented frontier food poisoning. Tonight, as you gnaw on smoky stew and half-burnt ash cake, you let the exhaustion fade for a moment. The food isn't great, but it's filling. You've fed yourself, and in the frontier's harsh math, that means you've won another round. You stretch out by the fire, the night breeze carrying the smell of wood smoke, your belly warm. Somewhere in the trees, a coyote yips, as if laughing at your culinary skills. You smile, muttering, "At least I didn't burn the water." Out here, that counts as a good day. Another dawn seeps through the cracks in your cabin, and the air bites colder than you expect. Last night's stew warmth has faded, leaving you shivering under a scratchy blanket that smells faintly of smoke, pine needles, and desperation. If food keeps you alive day by day, clothing and protection are what stand between you and the slow creep of exposure. Out here, hypothermia isn't a winter only problem. It lurks the moment your clothes get wet and the wind decides to laugh in your face. Your wardrobe is minimal. A few linen shirts, trousers patched until they resemble abstract art, maybe a wool coat if you were lucky enough to haul one across the wagon trail. Forget closets or fashion statements. On the frontier, if it kept you from freezing, it was worth wearing. Some settlers even stuffed grass or moss between layers of clothing for insulation. Practical? Yes. Comfortable? Absolutely not. You end up waddling like a scarecrow, but at least you're a warm scarecrow. Furs were the ultimate protection. Deer hides tanned into moccasins, rabbit pelts stitched into mittens, bear hides turned into cloaks. If it walked on four legs, someone probably wore it eventually. Historians still argue whether settlers were truly skilled at tanning hides, or if they just endured stiff, smelly leather because they had no other choice. Either way, the frontier reeked of smoke, sweat, and wet animal skins hung up to dry. That's not perfume you're smelling. That's survival. Here's a quirky tidbit. Raccoon hats weren't just a Hollywood gimmick. Yes, some settlers, and plenty of kids, really did wear them, often complete with tails dangling dramatically down their backs. Practical winter hat? Maybe. Statement piece? Definitely. Imagine today's Fashion Week featuring the Frontier collection, earth tone linen, stitched up moccasins, and a bold raccoon accessory. But the truth is, clothing didn't last. Buttons popped off, fabric tore, leather cracked. Every pioneer family had to be part-time tailors. Needles and thread were treasures, and patchwork became not just a style, but a necessity. You'd see shirts with elbows reinforced 3 times over, trousers with patches sewn on patches like a quilt in human form. Nobody teased you for looking shabby. It was either that or frostbite. Protection wasn't just about the weather either. Clothes doubled as armor against mosquitoes thick enough to blot out the sun. Settlers sometimes smeared animal fat or even mud on exposed skin to keep bugs at bay. Can you picture it? You, covered in mud, swatting at mosquitoes, trying to look dignified while essentially becoming a walking swamp creature. Still beats malaria. And shoes. Oh, the misery of shoes. Leather boots cracked in heat, soaked through in rain, and wore thin on rocky trails. Some settlers stuffed them with straw, others simply went barefoot, toughening their soles until they could walk across thorns with a shrug. You might call it frontier minimalism. Your toes, however, call it torture. As autumn edges in, the air sharpens. Frost glitters on the grass each morning, and you feel the urgency to gather warmer layers. You imagine sewing patches by candlelight, fingers pricked, muttering curses as thread tangles. Somewhere in the background, children complain about itchy wool while parents snap back, "Better itchy than frozen." That phrase alone could have been the frontier motto. Of course, protection extended beyond clothing. Settlers improvised crude shutters, stuffed cracks in cabin walls with moss or rags, and piled animal hides against drafts. You're living in what amounts to a glorified fort made of sticks, and every extra layer matters. The wind is patient, poking at weaknesses until it finds a way in. By evening, you're huddled near the fire, wrapped in a patched coat, the smoke soaking into the fibers until it feels like the jacket itself is exhaling ash. It's not glamorous. It's not even comfortable, but it keeps you alive, and that's all the frontier ever promised. You smile at the thought. Back home, you once complained that your sweater shrank in the wash. Out here, you'd give anything for that shrunken sweater, preferably without the mud perfume. The first real frostbite's harder than you expected. You wake to find your water bucket rimmed with ice, your breath fogging the air like little ghost puffs. The forest looks deceptively calm in its autumn colors, but the shift is clear. Winter is coming, and it doesn't care if you're ready. Spoiler, you probably aren't. Settlers dreaded their first winter more than anything. A bad harvest, thin clothing, or just one unlucky storm could mean the difference between seeing spring or being buried under it. Historians still argue whether early settlers underestimated the severity of frontier winters, or if they simply didn't have the resources to prepare properly. Either way, plenty of families didn't last through that first snow. You start chopping wood like your life depends on it, because it does. The axe thunks into logs, echoing across the frozen clearing. Your arms ache, your hands blister, and every swing feels slower than the last. But you need a towering stack of firewood, enough to last through weeks when the snow piles so high you can't even see your door. Imagine trying to dig your way out of your own house just to fetch more wood. It happened, often. And here's a quirky tidbit. Settlers sometimes measured their wealth not in money, but in cords of firewood. A man with a mountain of logs was practically a frontier king. Forget gold. Out here, the true riches were dry, split oak. Food becomes another desperate puzzle. Whatever you dried, smoked, or salted in the fall had to stretch. Beans, jerky, maybe a sack of flour if you were lucky. If you miscalculated, hunger gnawed at you long before spring thaw. Families boiled leather for soup, chewed on bark, or scraped lichen from rocks. Sounds dramatic, but diaries confirm it. Desperate measures weren't the exception. They were the rule. Cabin fever wasn't just a phrase. It was a psychological storm. Weeks of howling winds outside and smoky darkness inside wore down even the toughest. Imagine being crammed in a one-room cabin with your entire family, the walls sweating from condensation, the stew pot bubbling with the same old beans, and nothing but each other's complaints for entertainment. Frontier parents didn't just survive the weather. They survived their kids asking, "Is it spring yet?" Every single day. At night, the cold creeps into your bones no matter how many blankets or furs you pile on. You huddle closer to the fire, sparks crackling, smoke stinging your eyes. Your toes feel like brittle sticks, and you wonder if you'll wake up with all 10 still attached. Frostbite wasn't just a soldier's nightmare. It stalked anyone who spent too long outdoors chopping wood or hauling water. More than one settler ended up with blackened fingers or toes as grim souvenirs of their first winter. Neighbors, if you had any, sometimes banded together, trading food, sharing fires, or simply keeping each other sane with visits when the weather allowed. Other times, snow buried paths so deep that you went months without seeing another human face. Isolation could feel heavier than the snow itself, pressing down on your spirit until even silence felt too loud. The storm nights were the worst. Wind screamed through the cracks, rattling shutters, threatening to tear your roof free. Snow sifted inside through gaps in the logs, dusting your blankets. You lay awake, heart pounding, wondering if the cabin would still be standing by morning. And in the faint glow of firelight, you see your breath swirl like mist, proof of how thin the line between sheltered and exposed really is. Still, small comforts glimmer. The smell of bread, rare as it is, can make a cabin feel like heaven. A fiddle tune, scratched out on icy strings, might drown the storm for a moment. And the first morning the snow sparkles under a pale sun, crisp and silent, you can't help but feel a strange pride. You're still here. Winter is harsh, cruel, and unrelenting, but it's also the ultimate teacher. By the time spring's thaw comes dripping from the eaves, you've learned something vital. The frontier doesn't want you here. But if you're stubborn enough, maybe, just maybe, you'll outlast it. Snow melts, rivers swell, and green life bursts back into the clearing. You think maybe, just maybe, the worst is behind you. Then you hear it, the low guttural growl of something that doesn't care about your little victories. The frontier isn't empty land. It's home to creatures that view you as competition, intruder, or occasionally dinner. Wolves are the first to test you. Packs slink at the edge of firelight, eyes glowing like coals in the dark. They're not the bloodthirsty monsters old folk tales made them out to be, but hunger makes any animal bold. Settlers wrote about the eerie chorus of howls echoing across the trees, an unsettling reminder that the wilderness has its own residents. Historians still argue whether wolves truly posed a daily danger or if fear magnified their presence in memory. But one fact holds. If you left a carcass untended, you'd wake to find it gnawed clean. Then there are bears. Black bears, mostly, but sometimes the towering grizzlies if you're farther west. Imagine stepping outside for water and finding a bear sniffing around your cabin, casually flipping over a barrel like it's a toy. You're armed with a musket that may or may not fire in damp weather. The bear? Equipped with claws longer than your fingers and a bad attitude about being woken from a nap. One quirky tidbit: some settlers actually smeared bear grease in their hair or on leather boots, convinced it kept things waterproof. So, yes, you might be terrified of a bear outside, but also styling your bangs with its cousin's leftovers. And mountain lions? Silent shadows. You don't usually see them until they're already watching you. Stories circulated of children snatched near woodpiles, though whether those tales were truth or frontier cautionary folklore, historians still debate. Either way, the knowledge that something sleek and deadly might be perched on a branch above your head is enough to make you glance up every time you walk under the trees. It's not just predators. There are swarms of smaller beasts to contend with. Mosquitoes rise in clouds thick enough to choke you, buzzing like tiny chainsaws around your ears. Raccoons break into your food stores with their clever hands, undoing latches like little bandits. And skunks? You quickly learn that startling one near your cabin is the sort of mistake your nose will remember for weeks. You adapt, of course. You hang meat high, stringing it between trees to keep it safe. You reinforce doors and shutter windows, not just for storms, but for the snuffling noses of curious creatures. Sometimes you even turn predators into assets. Wolves hunted deer that might otherwise eat your crops, and bears, though dangerous, could be a valuable source of meat and fat if you were brave enough to take one down. The strange truth? You're as fascinating to them as they are to you. Imagine the bewilderment of a wolf pack watching a clumsy human drag logs into a pile or hearing the bang of a gunshot for the first time. You are, in their eyes, the odd new neighbor, and survival means negotiating an unspoken truce. At night, when the fire pops and the shadows dance, your ears pick out every rustle in the underbrush. Is it just a rabbit? Or something larger, teeth glinting in the dark? You pull the blanket tighter, telling yourself you'll laugh about it tomorrow. Spoiler, you probably won't. Still, there's awe mixed in with the fear. To see a stag stepping through morning mist, or to hear an owl's cry echo across the valley, it's a reminder that the frontier isn't just danger, it's wild beauty. And as much as these creatures threaten you, they also teach you. Respect the land, respect its rhythms, and maybe you'll find your place in the chorus of howls, growls, and midnight rustlings. One evening, you nick your hand while chopping wood. No big deal, right? You wrap it with a rag and keep working. But the next day, the skin feels hot, red streaks crawl up your arm, and you suddenly realize, here, even a splinter can kill you. Out on the frontier, illness and injury aren't inconveniences, they're potential death sentences. No pharmacies, no urgent care, no just Google it solutions. If your tooth abscesses, you're stuck with pliers, whiskey, and a friend with a shaky hand. Frontier families kept a few herbal remedies passed down from mothers or neighbors, teas made from willow bark for pain, poultices of honey or mashed onion for wounds. But whether they worked depended more on luck than science. Historians still argue whether homegrown cures actually saved lives or simply gave suffering people a sense of control. One mainstream fact: diseases like cholera, dysentery, and smallpox tore through settlements. Dirty water spread faster than gossip, and once sickness entered a cabin, it often claimed entire families. Imagine trying to care for your feverish child while knowing the nearest doctor is a 3-day ride away, and he might arrive too late anyway. Quirky tidbit: some settlers swore by carrying a chunk of camphor in their pockets, believing the strong smell warded off plague. Spoiler: the germs did not care about your minty fresh aura. Even minor injuries spiral. A cut foot means you limp, and limping means chores get neglected, which means food runs low, which means your entire household suffers. You don't get sick alone out here. Your weakness ripples outward, endangering everyone. And then there's childbirth. Frontier women faced it with staggering bravery. Midwives did what they could with boiled water and linen rags. But complications that are routine to today, like breech birth or hemorrhage, were often fatal. Yet families still grew large because more hands meant more help. And in a brutal twist, high child mortality made big families a necessity. You also live with constant paranoia about fevers. Is that shiver just from the chilly night air? Or is it malaria carried by mosquitoes buzzing outside? Settlers sometimes drained swamps in hopes of driving out bad air, not realizing the real culprits were tiny parasites in those bites. You could down quinine if you had it, but supplies weren't guaranteed. There's also the mental toll. A prolonged sickness traps you indoors, cut off from neighbors, with nothing but creaks and coughs for company. Cabin walls start to feel like a coffin closing in. Some journals describe a peculiar despair, like watching the wilderness itself close its grip while you lay powerless under a pile of quilts. Yet, resilience shines through. Families nursed one another with fierce determination. They improvised splints from saplings, stitched wounds with coarse thread, and prayed over the sick by candlelight. When recovery came, it felt like a miracle, celebrated with extra rations, music, or a simple grateful walk in fresh air. The grim reality is, you probably wouldn't survive long without a mix of luck, community, and stubborn will. And while modern you grumbles about waiting 20 minutes at urgent care, frontier you would have gladly traded a year's harvest for a bottle of antibiotics. So, as you stretch in bed tonight, consider this. Out there, survival hinged on whether a cut healed cleanly or festered silently. One wrong sneeze, one unlucky mosquito, and the wilderness claimed another name. You wouldn't even get a headstone sometimes, just a mound of earth by the river, marked with a crude cross. And tomorrow, life would march on, because chores wait for no grief. The day finally comes when you hear a knock at the cabin door. It isn't wind rattling the shutters or a raccoon rummaging in the ash pile. It's another human being. After weeks of isolation, you almost forget what that sounds like. Neighbors and strangers are a curious mix on the frontier, both your lifeline and your greatest headache. When people finally arrive, you size them up quickly. Are they the kind who will lend a hand with barn raising, or the kind who will accidentally let their pigs wander into your cornfield? Historians still argue whether frontier communities leaned more toward cooperation or conflict, but most agree necessity forced folks into each other's lives whether they liked it or not. One mainstream fact: barn raisings were real social events. Everyone chipped in, hammering, sawing, and hauling beams until the whole structure stood. Then came food, music, and maybe a jug passed around, because even on the harsh edge of survival, humans find excuses to celebrate. Your muscles ache from the day's work, but the laughter and fiddles under the lanterns remind you that you're not entirely alone in this wilderness. Quirky tidbit: some settlers kept their doors literally unlatched. Neighbors could walk in without knocking, especially in emergencies. Privacy was almost non-existent. If you were cooking dinner, someone might plop down at your table mid-bite. Today, we'd call it rude. Back then, it was just being neighborly. But not every visitor is friendly. Sometimes it's a drifter moving west, eyes scanning your barn a little too long. Sometimes it's another family settling nearby, and suddenly that stream you've been using is now their stream. Disputes over boundaries, hunting rights, or even noisy livestock could escalate fast, especially when there's no sheriff within riding distance. Fistfights, feuds, and even gunfire happened. And when lawmen did arrive, they usually came late, scribbled notes, and left folks to sort things out themselves. You also discover how fast gossip travels. One story told over a fence becomes tomorrow's camp rumor 5 miles away. Who's expecting another child? Who's behind on debts? Who baked a terrible pie at the last social? News spreads like wildfire. Loneliness breeds curiosity, and curiosity breeds chatter. The frontier might be vast, but secrets rarely stay buried. Then there's hospitality. Custom demanded you offer food or shelter to travelers, even if your pantry was barely stocked. You might grumble, but turning someone away was a stain on your reputation, and reputations mattered. Being known as stingy could mean fewer hands helping you in a crisis. That said, some settlers quietly admitted to hiding their better food when strangers knocked, offering only the rough stew while keeping the good stuff tucked away. Can't blame them. After all, salted pork doesn't grow on trees. Night gatherings became lifelines. Picture candlelit cabins stuffed with neighbors swapping tall tales, playing fiddle tunes, or holding prayer meetings. Children nodded off on quilts while adults argued politics or shared farming tricks. It wasn't just about fun. It was survival of the spirit. Alone, winter feels endless. Together, even hardship softens. Yet, with community comes obligation. If your neighbor's barn burns, you're there the next morning with your axe. If their child falls sick, you help fetch herbs. You don't get to pick and choose when to care. It's the tax of survival. Refuse, and you'll find fewer faces showing up when your own roof caves in. Sometimes, of course, neighbors overstep. One family's cow wanders, tramples your garden, and when you bring it up, they shrug. Cows will be cows. You clench your jaw and smile, but the resentment simmers. Frontier living demands cooperation, yet also brews grudges that last years. Historians still argue whether these feuds toughened communities or tore them apart. So when you blow out your lantern tonight, you reflect on the delicate balance. Other humans keep you alive, but they also test your patience, your generosity, and your sanity. Solitude is deadly, but so sometimes is company. You're splitting firewood when you see figures in the distance, silhouettes moving silently, watching from the tree line. Encounters with indigenous peoples were unavoidable on the frontier. After all, you're standing in their homeland. Sometimes it's trade, sometimes it's tension, and more often it's that quiet uncertainty. What do they want from you, and what do you want from them? The mainstream fact here: many early settlers survived their first years only thanks to native knowledge. Corn planting techniques, medicinal plants, even snowshoe designs. Borrowed, adapted, or outright copied. Without those lessons, your little homestead probably wouldn't stand a chance. You may not admit it out loud at the tavern, but deep down you know it's true. The quirky tidbit? Some settlers recorded being given food during hard winters, but later tried to repay the favor with trinkets like beads, buttons, or even old socks. Imagine offering socks for venison. It's a miracle you weren't laughed back into the woods. But barter was a language, and the vocabulary wasn't always equal. And here's where it gets tricky. Historians still argue whether most encounters leaned cooperative or hostile. One diary praises generosity, another curses raids and skirmishes. The truth? Both are correct, depending on time, place, and mood. From the indigenous perspective, of course, you're the one raiding. You've chopped down trees, fenced hunting grounds, and acted as if the land was empty until you arrived. When things went well, it felt like magic. Baskets of corn swapped for knives, furs traded for kettles, an evening of shared food and tentative words bridging worlds. When it went poorly, you slept with your musket by the bed, listening for footsteps in the dark. Fear makes every rustling leaf sound like an attack. You might think you're clever, planting your crops and digging a well, but indigenous knowledge of terrain dwarfs yours. They know which berries will poison you, which river will flood, which trail leads quickest back to safety. Your map is a scrap, theirs is centuries deep, woven into stories and rituals. And the cultural gap? Huge. Imagine showing off your awkward log cabin, only to realize they see it as fragile compared to their mobile teepees or longhouses that flex with the land. You brag about your axe, they chuckle at your clumsy pace through snow while their moccasins glide. It's humbling, and maybe a little embarrassing. Yet tension rises the longer you stay. More cabins mean more land claimed, more fences hammered in. A hunter who once traded venison with you may now find your cattle blocking his trail. What started as cautious coexistence becomes uneasy competition. You don't intend to provoke, but every field you clear is a statement louder than words. Still, moments of humanity break through. Picture a frontier child playing with a handmade toy gifted by a visiting family, or a shared fire on a bitter night where language fails but gestures suffice. These memories don't make the history books, but they linger in the small details. Smoke mingling, hands warming, nods exchanged. The harsh reality remains. Survival is political as much as physical. Every choice you make, planting here, building there, trading this, carries weight beyond your cabin walls. And while you swing your axe, splitting another log, you can't shake the thought that you're carving not just wood, but lines between worlds that were never meant to be divided. Dawn cracks through the shutters, and like clockwork, you drag yourself up. Daily chores don't wait for your mood, the weather, or even your aching back. Out here, survival is less about big heroic moments and more about relentless grind. Every single day, from sunrise until the stars blink on. You stretch your sore arms, reach for your boots, and sigh. Yep, it's another round of hauling, chopping, milking, and fixing. First order of business, firewood. The pile you stacked yesterday already looks pitifully small. Without a roaring fire, your cabin becomes an icebox at night, so you're out there splitting logs until your shoulders burn. Mainstream fact? On average, a family could burn through 40 cords of wood in a winter. That's an Olympic event's worth of swinging axes and lugging trunks. And don't forget, The axe handle breaks at the worst time possible. You mutter curses under your breath, then realize you'll just have to carve a replacement from green ash. Quirky tidbit, laundry day. Think it's bad now? Try scrubbing clothes in icy creek water with lye soap that burns your hands raw. Some settlers joked that laundry was harder than childbirth, though no mother agreed. Still, you can't let your only shirt rot off your back. You dunk, scrub, wring, and hope the wind dries it before the next rain. And historians still argue whether daily chores were evenly split between men, women, and children, or if everyone just pitched in wherever needed. Some records insist men only chopped wood and hunted, while others show women plowing fields and patching roofs. Honestly, out here, roles blurred. If something needed doing, you did it, no matter what the family Bible or neighbors thought. After wood and water, you turn to animals. Chickens squawk at you for feed. The cow needs milking. And that pig, you swear, is plotting your downfall with its beady eyes. Livestock are both blessing and curse. They feed you, clothe you, and sometimes trample your garden out of sheer spite. A cow kicking over the milk bucket feels like the universe playing a cruel prank. Then there's hauling water. That bucket feels heavier every trip, sloshing against your legs as you stumble back to the cabin. It's a good thing gyms don't exist yet. You'd laugh in the face of anyone paying money to carry weight for exercise. Out here, it's just called staying alive. You spend the rest of daylight hours patching fences, mending tools, tending crops, and squinting at that leak in the cabin roof. It's not glamorous, it's barely tolerable. But skip one task and tomorrow pays the price. Forget to feed the chickens? No eggs. Forget to weed the garden? No food. Forget to sweep the floor? Mice set up a rave in your pantry. Still, there are tiny rhythms that settle into comfort. The steady creak of the pump, the earthy smell of turned soil, the flicker of butter churning in the dim light. These tasks grind you down, but they also build you up. Each chore is a thread, weaving the frontier life together. And jokes? Oh, you find them. A neighbor once quipped that frontier folks never worried about exercise. They worried about dropping dead of exhaustion. Another said you didn't need a clock. Your cows mooed you awake and your chickens tucked you in. Out here, livestock were the real bosses. As evening falls, you finally slump by the fire. Hands blistered, back stiff. You can't help but laugh at the absurdity. This entire grand adventure is 90% sweeping floors and 10% fending off bears. But the grind works. Every day survived is a small victory. And tomorrow, you'll do it all over again. Word count 1,012. After all the endless grinding, chopping, and hauling, you'd think life out here is nothing but misery. But survival has its little rewards, and sometimes joy sneaks in like sunlight through a cracked shutter. You catch yourself smiling at the strangest things, a fiddle scratching out a half-remembered tune, the smell of wild berries bubbling in a crude pie, or just hearing your neighbor laugh across the valley. Out here, pleasure doesn't come in bursts of luxury. It seeps into the cracks of hardship. Picture this. After a brutal week of hauling logs and nearly losing your eyebrows to a chimney fire, someone digs out a battered violin. The notes are sharp, squeaky, sometimes comically off-key, but everyone gathers around like it's a grand concert. You tap your foot, laugh at the missed notes, and clap along. Fact check. Fiddles and harmonicas were the frontier's unofficial instruments because they were small enough to carry on wagons and cheap enough to survive rough travel. They kept morale alive better than sermons ever could. Quirky tidbit? Settlers sometimes made jug bands with literal jugs, washboards, and spoons. Imagine sitting around after 12 hours of backbreaking work and your neighbor proudly announces he's bringing out the spoons. You roll your eyes, but by the end of the night, you're grinning like a fool as everyone joins in. Music, no matter how silly, makes you forget your blistered hands for a while. Then there's food, not the daily mush of beans and cornmeal, but those rare moments of sweet discovery. You stumble across a patch of wild strawberries, or your neighbor gifts you a jar of honey, and suddenly life feels rich. Historians still argue whether frontier diets were as bleak as diaries suggest, or if these little bursts of flavor were more common than we think. Either way, one taste of something rare, and you'd swear you were dining like royalty. Celebrations also stitched people together. Barn raisings turned into full-blown parties, neighbors hauling beams by day, dancing by firelight at night. Kids ran wild, adults swapped stories, and for once nobody worried about wolves or roof leaks. Imagine the relief of laughing until your stomach hurts in a place where danger usually lurks outside every shadow. And of course, there were jokes. You might tease that the local preacher gave longer sermons just to avoid chores back home, or that Frontier coffee, boiled until the pot cracked, was less a drink and more a dare. Humor became a kind of medicine, a way to survive not just frostbite, but loneliness. These joyful sparks didn't erase hardship, but they gave it meaning. They reminded you why you endured, for laughter, for companionship, for the satisfaction of pulling a warm loaf of bread out of a clay oven after weeks of ash-flavored meals. And maybe, just maybe, for the chance to sit under the stars, belly full, ears ringing from fiddle tunes, and think, all right, maybe I can survive this. Because out here, joy isn't something you wait for. It's something you create out of scraps, spoons, and a stubborn refusal to give up. And that, strangely enough, might be the strongest tool you've got. By now, the endless chopping, the rough laughter, and even the fiddle squeaks have woven into your life like threads in a homespun quilt. But don't fool yourself. Frontier survival doesn't just wear down your body, it grinds your mind too. You wake up at dawn, not just tired, but worried, a low-level hum of anxiety that never shuts off. Will the crops sprout? Will the cabin hold through the next storm? Will you even make it to winter? Out here, the biggest predator isn't a bear, it's the weight of your own thoughts. The mainstream fact: frontier settlers wrote about melancholy as though it were another sickness, right up there with fever or frostbite. And it wasn't rare. Long, isolated winters could drive people into funks so deep they'd barely leave their beds. You might call it seasonal depression today. Back then, folks just said you had the blues. No therapy, no medication. Just grit, prayer, or maybe a strong drink if you had one. And the quirky tidbit? Some settlers swore by bizarre remedies for sadness. One diary mentions wearing a necklace made from potato slices to draw out bad spirits. Basically, frontier aromatherapy, only stinkier. Another recommended vigorous dancing as a cure, which is hilarious until you realize they were dead serious. Picture yourself sulking in the corner, only for your neighbor to shove you up with, "Dance, or you'll stay miserable." Historians still argue whether the frontier made people tougher or just wore them down faster. One camp claims the hard life bred resilience, that every hardship toughened your mental armor. The other says the relentless grind broke many before they could adapt. Both sides have evidence, but when you're lying awake at 3 a.m., staring at the cabin roof, you're not sure which camp you belong to. And loneliness. That's the sharpest blade. You miss voices, real conversations that aren't about firewood or fox tracks. Your family may be with you, but sometimes that isn't enough. You crave community, novelty, something new beyond the same walls and same trees. In moments like these, even hearing another human laugh across the valley feels like medicine. So how do you cope? You invent routines, sharpening tools not because they're dull, but because the rhythm calms your nerves. You hum old songs under your breath while splitting logs. You talk to animals, or let's be honest, argue with them. Oh, so you're back again, stealing my beans, you thieving raccoon? Spoiler, you lose the argument every time. Humor keeps your sanity intact, even when no one else is around to hear the punchline. Fear, too, gnaws at your brain. Every creak in the woods makes your pulse race. You might laugh in daylight about wolves or strangers, but in the dark, those jokes dissolve into sweaty palms and shallow breathing. Some settlers swore their minds played tricks. Phantom footsteps, glowing lights in the trees, whispers in the wind. Maybe exhaustion creates ghosts where none exist. Or maybe the frontier always had more mysteries than anyone could explain. The truth is, frontier survival isn't just chopping wood and planting corn. It's a constant mental chess game with yourself. Can you stay hopeful one more day? Can you find one more reason to push through? Sometimes that reason is big, like seeing your children grow stronger. Other times it's small, like the satisfaction of a crackling fire after endless rain. You remind yourself of this whenever doubt creeps in. Endurance isn't about never breaking down. It's about stitching yourself back together over and over with spit, laughter, and maybe the occasional potato necklace. The seasons blur together now, years slipping by in a cycle of sweat, frost, planting, and waiting. When you finally pause, Leaning on your axe, staring at the crooked cabin that's somehow still standing, you realize you've become something you never thought possible: a frontier survivor. You're not polished, not pretty, but alive. And out here, that counts for everything. You've earned the scars on your hands, the stoop in your back, the weather-battered look in your eyes. Each mark tells a story. The winter your toes nearly froze off, the summer your field drowned in flood, the night you stayed awake with your rifle across your lap. These aren't just accidents. They're your living history. Here's the mainstream fact. Frontier survival built legacies. Generations of families trace their roots back to those who proved up on their land grants, sticking it out when many others gave up and went home. Without their stubbornness, whole towns never would have existed. But here's the flip side. Historians remind us that this winning of the West came at brutal cost, with native nations displaced, ecosystems altered, and thousands who simply vanished into the silence of failed settlements. The frontier dream was never tidy. It was survival tangled with sacrifice. Quirky tidbit time. Archaeologists have dug up random relics from abandoned cabins, like a violin missing strings buried under a hearth, or a jar full of desiccated pickles someone clearly meant to come back for. These ghostly leftovers whisper that even the toughest pioneers clung to comfort objects, odd treasures that meant home when the wilderness pressed in too close. And here's the debate historians still chew over. Was it worth it? Was the frontier a triumph of grit and human will, or just needless suffering carved into land that was never truly empty? They'll never settle that question. And maybe that's the real legacy. The contradictions you carried. Pride and guilt, laughter and tears, endurance and exhaustion. But you've made it through. Against floods, frost, fear, and hunger, you've carved out a piece of earth where once there was only forest and prairie. You've built more than a cabin. You've built a life that echoes. Your footsteps become the roots of future roads. Your sweat becomes the stories told around future fires. Your small patch of survival becomes the seed of something far larger than you. And though you'll never fully shake the memory of what it cost, there's a strange peace in that. You were tested by wilderness and came out with calluses and stories strong enough to last. Word count. One down, 300 words. Now the axe is set down, the fire burns low, and the long silence of the frontier stretches around you like a soft blanket. The frantic chopping, the scratching hunger, the sudden fear, they fade into something gentler in the quiet of night. Your mind slows, your breath evens. The cabin creaks, but it feels like a lullaby now instead of a warning. Picture the fields outside, silvered under moonlight, the trees standing still, no longer threatening, only watching. The animals are curled in their dens, the wind has softened to a sigh, and the endless horizon no longer looks dangerous but calm, like a sea at rest. The hardships don't vanish, but for this moment they loosen their grip. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. The frontier doesn't ask anything of you now. No firewood to chop, no traps to check, no fear to gnaw at your mind. Just rest. You've survived the day, and that is enough. In the hush, you almost hear faint laughter. Neighbors gathered, fiddle music slipping between logs, the kind of fragile joy that always lit up even the darkest cabins. Hold that sound as you drift. Because the truth is, survival was never only about grit, it was also about finding these small sparks, holding them tight, and letting them guide you forward. So close your eyes, breathe deeply. Let the wilderness fade into memory and dream of gentler landscapes, fields that grow without floods, skies without storms, mornings that begin with warmth instead of worry. The frontier is behind you now, and what remains is peace. Good night. Open quote, open quote, open quote. End of script. Sweet dreams.